Today we're going to be talking about solving inequalities. So what an inequality is any equation that looks like a variable less than, greater than, less than or equal to, greater than or equal to a number. So x is less than or equal to 9 would be an inequality. So what we're going to be talking about, whenever you solve an inequality, you also have to graph an inequality. So here are some basic graphing tips before we get to solving them. So if you have a less than or a greater than sign, then you're going to graph that point as an open circle. So if this was x is less than 9, and we were to graph that here, then this would be a 9 right there. So we'd use an open circle whenever it's x is less than or greater than. All right? Now, if you have a less than or equal to, a greater than or equal to, or just an equal sign when you're graphing, then you're going to use a closed circle like you see here. So if this was x is less than or equal to 9, then we put the 9 right there. Okay? So next thing you do after you put your points is you have to shade. So as we work on shading these, there's a few things that we have to consider. So if your variable is less than your number, then you want to shade to the left. So in this case, for both of these, seeing that we had x is less than or equal to 9, then that would mean that we'd want to shade to the left. So I'd want to shade to the left over here, and I'd want to shade to the left over here. All right? And then if your variable is more than your number, or greater than your number, then you're going to shade to the right. So in either of these cases, had our x been greater than that, we would have shaded to the right side of both of these. All right, so let's do some examples of our graphing. So if I had x is less than 8. So let's say I had that, and I wanted to graph that inequality. So first of all, I've got a number line. Just going to leave it blank. Now, the only number that I'm concerned about is this 8. So I'm just going to put a tick here and put an 8, because that's the only number I'm concerned about. So the next question I want to ask myself is it an open circle or is it a closed circle? Because it's a less than sign and there's no equal sign underneath it, then I'm going to use an open circle. Okay? And because x is less than my value, I want to shade to the left. All right, let's do another one. X is greater than or equal to 1. Okay, so once again, I want to draw a number line, put one tick in it, and label that 1, because it's the only point I'm concerned about. All right, so my next question that I should always ask myself is, should it be an open circle or a closed circle? So because this is greater than or equal to, because there's that equal sign, I want to use a closed circle. Okay? And with that closed circle, next thing I want to ask is it greater than or less than? So this is x is greater than or equal to my 1. So because it's greater than, I want to shade to the right. Okay, let's do one more. Let's say I had 3 is less than x. Okay, so once again, the only number I'm concerned about is my 3. So when I draw my number line, I'm going to put a tick, and I'm going to label that 3. Okay, so my next question to myself, is that going to be an open circle or a closed circle? So because of the fact that there is no equal sign underneath here, it's just a less than sign, that means it's going to be an open circle. Now, what makes this one trickier is the x is on the other side. So this is saying 3 is less than my x, which actually means that x is greater than my 3. So that would mean, seeing that my variable is greater than my number, I want to shade to the right. Okay, and then let's just do one more. Let's say -5 is greater than or equal to b. Okay, so once again, drawing my number line. The only number that I'm concerned about is my -5, so that's going to be on my tick. All right, because this is greater than or equal to, I want to use a closed circle. because of that equal sign. So whenever you see any sort of an equal sign, whether it's an actual equal sign or that equal sign that's underneath, that's going to be a solid circle versus an open circle. All right? And so -5 is greater than my variable, which means that my variable is less than my number. So I'd want to shade to the left. There is a very useful trick that people tend to use when they're graphing inequalities, and that's going the direction of the arrow. The important thing to remember when you're using this trick is to make sure that your variable is on the left. The only way you can use the arrow pointing trick is if your variable is on the left. So for instance, for these first two, is this arrow, because my variable is on the left, the arrow is pointing towards the left. So I shaded to the left. On this one, my variable once again is on the left, and my arrow is pointing towards the right, so I shade towards the right. Now, as we go back down to these two, you'll notice that the variable is not on the left. So in order to do that, you have to flip the equation around. So I could turn this into x is greater than 3. So, well, I flipped around my numbers, but when I do that, I also have to flip around my sign. So when I do that, now my arrow points towards the right, and I shaded towards the right. And same thing over here. If I want to put the variable on the left and use this trick, I've got to shift it. So b would then be less than or equal to my -5. So now that my variable is on the left, I now have to shade towards the left, according to my arrow, which is over here. So that's the most important thing to remember about that trick. You can only use the arrow trick if your variable is on the left. All right, so now let's do some examples. So for A, we got x plus 3 is less than 8. So if all of the problems that you're dealing with now that you're in algebra, they're not just going to give you it. You got to solve for it first and then go from there. So first things first, this is just like anything else. You're going to treat your inequality sign just like an equal sign. So I want to get the x by itself. So seeing that my 3 is positive, I'd want to move the 3 over to the other side by subtracting 3 from both sides. So my 3's here, cross each other out. So I'm left with x is less than 5. So when I graph this, I'm going to make my 1 point, which is just going to be 5. Seeing that it is a less than sign and there's no equal line underneath, I'm just going to use an open circle. And because my variable is on my left, I can use the arrow trick. So the arrow is pointing towards the left, so I want to shade towards the left. Okay, let's do another one. Let's take B, for example. So 16 is greater than x minus 5. Okay, so once again, I want to solve for my variable. So seeing that I've got x minus 5, and I want to get the x by itself, I want to add 5 to both sides to get rid of this -5. So I got 16 plus 5, which is 21, is greater than x, and my -5 and my +5 cross each other out. So I've got 21 is greater than x, and if I want to use my arrow trick, I've got to flip this around. So I have to make this x is less than 21. So when I graph this, my 1 point is going to be 21. Seeing that it's a less than sign, I'm going to use an open circle. And seeing that my arrow is pointing towards the left, I'm going to shade towards the left. C. Let's say 3x plus 4 is greater than or equal to 13. Once again, you want to solve for x. You want to get x by itself. So I want to subtract 4 from both sides. So I got a 3x. My 4's cross each other out. Is greater than or equal to 13 minus 4 would be 9. And now I want to get rid of this 3. So seeing that they are being multiplied, I want to divide both sides by 3. So x is greater than or equal to 9 divided by 3, which is 3. Okay, so when I graph this on my number line, my 1 point that I want is going to be 3. Seeing that it's a greater than or equal to sign, that means I want to use a closed circle. And my variable is on the left, so I can use my arrow trick. So my arrow is right now pointing towards the right, so I want to shade towards the right. Okay, so for D, we got 3x plus 5 is greater than or equal to 4x. All right, so once again, I want to get my x's by themselves. So I've got variables on both sides of the inequality, and I want to get all my x's together. So I want to move my 3x over to the other side, so that way I'm just left with 5 on this side, and all my x's are on the other side. So I'm going to subtract 3x from both sides. So the 3x's on this side cross each other out. So I'm left with 5 is greater than or equal to 4x minus 3x, which is positive x. Now, presently my variable is on the right. In order to be able to use my arrow trick, I've got to flip around the inequality. So I've got x is less than or equal to 5. Okay, so now when I graph this, the 1 point that I want is a 5. Because this is less than or equal to, I'm going to be able to use a closed circle because part of it is equal. And then using my arrow trick, seeing that my variable is on the left, my arrow is pointing towards the left, so I've got to shade towards the left. So for E, we've got 8 minus 4a is greater than negative 2a. All right, so once again, I've got a's on both sides of my inequality, so I'm going to get all my a's together. So seeing that I've got a negative 4a and an 8 over here, and I've only got a negative 2a here, I want to move the negative 4a over to this side so that all my a's are together, and I'm left with a number on the other side. So in order to get rid of a negative 4a, I'm going to have to add 4a to both sides. So I've got 8, my negative 4a and my positive 4a cross each other out, is greater than negative 2a plus 4a, which is positive 2a. And now I want to get rid of this 2, so seeing that they're being multiplied, I want to divide both sides by 2. So 8 divided by 2 is 4, is greater than, my 2's cross each other out, so I've got 4 is greater than a. Okay, so in order to use my variable or my shading trick, I have to get my a on the left side. So I've got to flip this inequality. So I've got a is less than 4. So when I shade or when I graph this, the 1 point that I care about is my 4. So that's going to be on my tick. All right. And then it's a less than sign with no equal, so it's going to be an open circle. And my arrow, because my variable's on the left, I can use my arrow trick, and my arrow is pointing towards the left, so I'm going to shade towards the left. All right, and last example. So we got 2x plus 3 is less than or equal to 5x. All right, so once again, I've got variables on both sides of the inequality. So seeing that I've got a 2x plus 3 on this side and just a 5x on the other side, I want to move the 2x over to the other side. So subtract 2x from both sides. So the 2x and the negative 2x cross each other out, so I've got 3 is less than or equal to 5x minus 2x is 3x. Divide both sides by 3. And so I got 1 is less than or equal to x. All right, so right now I cannot use my shading trick because my variable's on the right and I need to be on the left. So I'm going to flip around my inequality. So x is greater than or equal to 1. When I do my graphing, the only point that I care about is 1. It's a greater than or equal to sign. So it's going to be a solid circle. And then my arrow is pointing towards the right. So I'm going to shade towards the right.